everybody. Thanks for joining us. We are continuing The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. I love this little fishy. I think that's so funny. Anyway, we have been reading chapters 3 and 4, and so we were going to come together and discuss. And for me, chapter 3 was crazy long. I don't know if you're reading it or listening to the Audible, but it was like probably one of the longest chapters I've read in a book in a really long time. So we may or may not get through my Cliff Notes, the Jera Notes version of all of this, but in our hour time block, but I'm going to try and get through everything I can, but I don't want to speed over it too much and miss out on some of these like golden nuggets in the book, because it is really good. Also, I wanted to share a little tip I learned this week. I have the book, but I'm also listening to it on Audible. And I found that the author, Gay Hendricks, he speaks kind of slowly. He's very eloquent. His diction is perfect, by the way. It's nuts. But he speaks slowly and he talks slower than I read. And so Kindle actually helped me figure out that you can speed up their voice on Audible, which I did not know you could do. And I was like, oh my gosh, because I was finding myself like listening to him read and I was trying to read along with him. And I would find myself a couple of paragraphs ahead. Like I just read faster than he talks. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so she told me that, and that was a total game changer. So I just wanted to share that little tip. If you don't know, you can change the speeds on Audible. That way you're not like, yawning or, finding your mind wander while they're reading. But, so chapter 3, it's getting specific and how to spot the upper limit problem in daily life. So he's wanting to talk about in learning to live in your zone of genius, which is where that's like the sweet spot of understanding, recognizing, and embracing your potential and then using it to, the ability God has given you to bless your family, bless the world, bless your corporation. And so he says that you want to benefit from making a lifelong pursuit out of spotting your upper limit behaviors. Make spotting them a part of your daily ongoing maintenance procedures, just like brushing your teeth or adjusting the side mirrors of your car. And I know, like, while I was reading this, I found myself, and we'll get a little bit later to it, but he's asking questions about how to figure out what your zone of genius is, how to spot upper limit problems, all the things, and teaches you how to do that. But it really is like an ongoing thought process. That's something I discovered throughout this chapter, that you really do just need to sit and think about it for a second and start to recognize and notice these things. And so he says there's typical ways that we upper limit ourselves, and they're kind of generally the same things over and over that people do. And he says the other day I caught myself in the act of upper limiting myself. It puts the upper limit problem in a practical context of something that you're doing. When you're upper limiting, you're doing something that is crimping your flow of positive energy. Tune into yourself as you read these, and I'll go through them quickly to discover which ones are most familiar to you. The most common one is worry. So worrying is usually a sign that you're upper limiting. It's usually not a sign that we're thinking about something useful. And I thought this to be really good. If anybody struggles with just like I'm a worry wart, I sweat the small things, I have a lot of anxiety, panic attacks. I know Rena and I have discussed, like, I've experienced panic attacks in my life. And she's like, me too. Like usually like panic attacks are not generally like a real threat or a real fear, but your body thinks it is. And so I found this interesting when he talks about that worrying is not usually a sign of something useful. The critical sign that we're worrying unnecessarily is when we're worrying about something we have no control over. So worrying is useful only if it concerns a topic that we can actually do something about, and if it leads to our taking positive action right away. And I just found that to be a good little nugget, whether you struggle with worrying or anxiety or whatever. Like, it's true. Like, don't sweat the small stuff. And that's actually something I've been teaching my son, because he tends to sweat the small things. And so I wanted to share this with him too. Like, it's okay to worry about things if you can take action and try to fix it. But if it's not something you can take action towards, a positive action right away to do something about it, then you're probably wasting your time worrying about it. So when things are going well for us, our upper limit mechanism kicks in And we suddenly start worrying about things going wrong in some way. And I shared last week about how I was enjoying my plane ride to convention with my husband and my youngest child. And my 2 older children were home with grandparents back in Texas. And I immediately started worrying on the plane of all these things that could go wrong. Like, I was excited about my trip. And then I was like, oh my gosh, but the kids, what if something happens to them while I'm gone? Or what if the plane crashes and they never see us again, or whatever? I mean, like, it's the things that enter your brain and get you going crazy when you're having a good time. Like, your body tends to just cut off the good, because you're enjoying it. And so this whole book is about how to stop yourself from enjoying life. Like, it's okay to live in positivity and have good times and have good things happen to you. Like, you deserve these things. So, we just start justifying these worry thoughts with more worry thoughts. And soon we're busily manufacturing scenarios of things falling apart, coming unglued, and devolving toward imminent doom. And I know that to be so true in my life, because I do that. But he says, let's say you make a cup of coffee in the morning and you put it in a to-go cup and you rush off to work. You're speeding along, happily sipping your brew, when suddenly you worry that you may have left the kettle boiling on the stove, or you left the stove on. I know if anybody's had those things, right? You're like, oh my gosh, did I unplug my flat iron? Like, I do that too. And so now I'm in the habit of, like, after I do my hair, I just unplug it. Like, that's become like a habit of mine, because then I don't have to worry about it. But it's a reality-based worry thought, right? Because it is worth worrying about. First, your house could burn down. That would not be good. And second, you can do something about it. There's a good way to know if a worry thought is something you should pay attention to. And so this is for all my anxiety, panic attack, worry wart people. You should ask yourself, is it a real possibility? And is there any action I can take right now to make a positive difference? Like, can I go back and unplug the flat iron? Can I turn the stove off? Can I prevent something terrible from happening to my kids while I'm on a plane? No, that's not in my hands. So why am I worrying about it? I just need to put my faith in God and enjoy my plane ride, right? So with the kettle, the answers are obviously yes and yes. It's a real possibility, and there are positive actions you can take right now. You can go back and check to see if you turned the flame off. You could also call back to the house and have somebody else check. However, even these kinds of reality-based worry thoughts can be an upper limit symptom for some people. Some of us constantly are worrying about whether we've done something wrong or careless, like leaving a kettle on, and it's a facet of our personality. I know quite a bit about that personality type, having had the opportunity to study an example from the inside for as long as I can remember. It's not important whether you're born a worrier or a newcomer to the habit. All you really need to know is this: when things are going well, or when you're feeling particularly good, you can always bring yourself down by manufacturing a stream of worry thoughts. Like, anybody is capable of doing this. If something's going well, you can always ruin it for yourself. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah. So it doesn't really matter if you're, a repetitive worrier or someone who deals with anxiety and panic attacks like myself, but you could just be anybody, right? Like, we can tend things are going well and we can just crash it. So he says, I encourage you to make a careful study of your worry habits. I've seen a lot of lives change, including my own, when people drop their addiction to worry. And yes, worry is definitely an addiction. If you worry long enough about the stock market crashing, you'll eventually hit the jackpot, because from time to time, it's always going to crash. And that kind of reminds me of like this kind of funny, but we're reading a different book, but talking about like, there's that joke, you've seen it on social media probably, where it's like the Indians and they're praying for rain, or like a circle maker, right? Like, the things eventually happen because they didn't stop praying, or they didn't stop dancing. Like, so eventually, so if you continue to worry over and over and over, eventually it's going to crash. Something's going to happen eventually because you never stopped worrying about it. So that made me think of that. But so that's one of the things that we can do that gets us just, freaking out about all the things. But with practice, you'll get very nimble at noticing which thoughts are ones that you should pay attention to and which one you can dismiss. He says, imagine squeezing a tennis ball in your hand and then releasing your grip and just dropping the ball. A lot of people don't realize that they can dismiss worry thoughts just like that. One moment, the thoughts have a grip on you, and then you suddenly realize it's you that's gripping onto them. And so you release the grip and the thoughts disappear. They come back again, you release them again. With practice, they disappear and they don't come back if you give your mind a more productive thing to do. The productive thing to do is to look for the positive new emergence that's trying to happen. In other words, when you find yourself worrying, know that there is something positive trying to break through. And I can look back at myself on that for convention. I'm trying to get back in person with my people, get back, training, the celebratory things that I had earned from my team, all this greatness that's about to happen. And then I just, crush it with all these worry thoughts. And I'm like, God, this was like a breakthrough that was happening for me. I needed this. I needed this for my social and, and emotional. I needed this for training. I needed this for so many reasons, for both personal and professional. And I was trying to stifle my positive breakthrough by worrying. So your worry thoughts, particularly if you find yourself recycling the same ones over and over, they are a flag waving at you from your zone of genius. Something's trying to get your attention. Look beyond the worry thoughts, and you will often find a new direction that's being laid out for you. Excuse me. He says, I'm learning to live in it. To do that, I need to overcome thousands of years of programming that adversity is a constant requirement of existence. So I'm going to read that again. So I thought that was interesting. I need to overcome thousands of years of programming that adversity is a constant requirement of existence. So I was like, oh my gosh, we need to savor our success. So we're learning to let ourselves enjoy love, abundance, and other forms of positive energy without sabotaging ourselves. So that's one of the ways that we can crush everything, right? Is worry. So the next thing is criticism and blame. This is on page 76 if you're following in your book. Most worry thoughts have absolutely nothing to do with reality. Like we've already determined that, right? Criticism and blame are addictions as well. And they are the number one destroyer of intimacy in close relationships. Self-criticism and criticizing others are one and the same. In other words, self-blame is part of the same upper limit pattern as blaming someone else. Both criticizing yourself and criticizing others are highly addictive and very popular ways of busting up the flow of positive energy. Remember earlier when I said that worry is useful only if it concerns something real that you can do something about? Criticism works the same way. It is useful only if it's directed at a specific thing and produces a useful result. For example, if I'm standing on your toe in an elevator, go ahead and criticize me. It's useful, especially if it produces the result of liberating your toe from the tyranny of my shoe. So become a keen observer of critical statements that come out of your mouth or fly through your mind. Begin to sort them into two piles. Pile one contains all the criticisms about real things that you plan to do something about. Like, hey, you're standing on my toe, get off. And pile two contains all the others. So if you're constantly living in criticism and blame, like that's another way to stifle our zone of genius. So deflecting is on page 80, and this is following the example of deflection. And I think a lot of women do this. He uses men in his example, so my guess men do it too, but I think women tend to do this a lot. So his example is that Joe said, you did a great job on that presentation. And Jack says, I ran out of time and I had to leave out some of the best stuff. And Joe says, still, I noticed that people were really paying attention. And Jack says, well, I'm glad they weren't paying too close attention because they would have seen more places that I messed up. And I think women tend to do that too. We'll compliment each other on things, whether it's, the way you did a training call or your outfit or whatever it is. People compliment women and we tend to downplay it and we don't accept the compliment. And so deflection keeps the positive energy from landing, being received and being acknowledged. So instead of deflecting it, Joe could have said, you did a great job on that presentation. And then Jack could say, thanks, I appreciate you saying that. I'm glad it came across well because I felt bad about running out of time and leaving out some of the best stuff. So it's not that his feeling wasn't valid or that he, wasn't sure he did a great job. I mean, it's not like you have to pretend and lie about it, but you can appreciate and absorb and take the compliment. So here Jack received the appreciation instead of flicking it off. He acknowledged Joe for the expression of positive energy, but adding his own reservations about the presentation only after he let the appreciation land on him. So he says, here's what I would do when you notice yourself deflecting. When someone says the equivalent of nice shot, and he's referencing some guys playing golf back into the story here. And basically they're playing golf, nice shot. Oh, I didn't make contact. Oh, it's about time I got one in, I've been putting bad all day, whatever. So he says, instead of when someone says the equivalent of nice shot to you, pause for a moment to register the beam of positive energy that's being aimed at you, and then thank the person who beamed it your way. So somebody's like, hey, nice shot. And you can say, thank you. I wish I'd made better contact with it, but it came out pretty good anyway. So it's okay to accept, and we need to accept that positive energy. The art of getting beyond our upper limit problem has a lot to do with creating space within us to feel and appreciate natural good feelings. And he says, by natural, I mean good feelings that aren't induced by alcohol, sugar, and other short-term fixes. And so the next one was squabbling. This one I actually highlighted quite a bit on. I don't know if this was just as a mom, I was like, oh, I need to know all this about squabbling, like with my kids or something. But, and he even refers to a married couple here, but he says arguments are one of the most common ways of bringing yourself down when you've hit your upper limit. When things are going well, you can crimp the flow of positive energy quickly by starting a conflict. Then the conflict develops a life of its own, lasting for hours, days, or even years. And so you drop back into your zone of competence or your zone of excellence, and genius takes a back seat. If you can learn to see arguments as upper limit symptoms, you can make big breakthroughs in getting beyond them. Arguments are caused by two people or two countries racing to occupy the victim position in the relationship. He says, I've never, ever witnessed the following kind of interchange. This is on page 85. Person A says, why are you making me so miserable? This problem is entirely your fault. And person B, which he says this has never happened, will never say, wow, thanks for pointing that out. I agree completely. It's clear that I am the perpetrator and you're the victim and that your misery is entirely my fault. Like, that's never going to happen. We know that, right? Even in marriage, we know that's never going to happen. So he says it tends to actually shift. He has seen about 5,000 variations instead of where the person's like, I'm making you miserable. I'm the one who's the victim here. It's your fault, not mine. I've been putting up with you for so long. I ought to get some sort of prize. Well, that's absurd. Let me tell you all the reasons I'm the victim here. Well, great. Then when you get through, I'll tell you how all of them are your fault. They always have been and they always will be. I was like, oh my gosh, like we all have those exchanges, right? So once the race for the victim position is underway, each person must find some way to out-victim the other. Each entity, here's the key insight though, that each entity in a situation represents 100%. And each entity in a conflict has 100% of the responsibility for resolving the conflict. Like, this is the only way to fix it. Person A is a whole and complete 100 person, and person B is a whole and complete 100% as well. If two people are involved, there's 200% responsibility to be divided up. If both people will claim 100% responsibility, there's a possibility of ending the conflict, but nothing less than 100% will work. And I read this yesterday. And then Danny came home from work late, and he had asked me while he was gone, he texted me and was like, hey, will you have Liam bring up the trash can, like from the edge of our property, bring it back up to the house? And I was like, oh yeah, sure. Well, I forgot to ask Liam to do that. And so he pulls in, I'm actually talking to him because he had gone to the store for me. I'm like, how far away are you? Whatever, we're on the phone. And he's like, oh, Liam didn't bring in the trash can. And I was like, oh, I claim 100% of that. I forgot to tell him to do it. Like, that was totally my bad. And he was like, oh, okay. Like, but if I'd have been like, I don't know, I could have made up something else, or, oh, why are you bitching about that? But I didn't, I was like, oh, nope, he did ask me to do that. I 100% didn't. It's not Liam's fault. It's mine. So, we just all need to take responsibility for our own actions. And when people step out of the victim position and take 100% responsibility, marriages and businesses flourish. And I was like, I just thought that was an applicable, thing that I think we could all probably apply to our family. But the other way that we tend to upper limit ourselves is by getting sick or getting hurt. When things are going well, some of us have a pattern that is pure upper limit problems. We get sick or hurt. Take a moment to think back over times when you've gotten sick or gotten hurt in an accident. He says you probably won't be able to remember very many of them in detail, but if you can pull up memories of some of your illnesses and accidents, ask yourself if they came during or just after a big win in business or a period of good times in a relationship. But yes, people get sick for all sorts of reasons. But if you're keenly interested in taking your big leap, you want to examine everything that brings you pain and suffering as a potential upper limit problem. You may find that you can be a lot healthier than you ever imagined. So many of us simply never look at the effect that our minds and emotions have on our physical health. For example, if I felt the sniffles and scratchy throat of a cold coming on, I would pause and wonder whether I was upper limiting myself. And I thought that was really interesting. And he also says that after he realized this, as of this writing, he hasn't had a cold or flu in 13 years. So it's like, wow. But we've heard like the research and people, that how powerful our mind is. And like, we can literally make ourselves sick, right? Like, if you don't know that, you should research it because it's true. You really can. So I think that's interesting. Like, I started wondering and thinking myself of other things, like when things were going really well, either in business or my marriage, my family or whatever. And I was like, and then I started kind of wondering, like, I have a backache that I haven't had in a while. And so now I'm like, am I upper limiting myself? But your exploration will go easier if you have a map. So he's provided a map that he calls the 3 Ps. And the 3 Ps are punishment, prevention, and protection. So those 3 Ps can help you understand the real driving force behind many illnesses and accidents. So punishment, for example, and this one was like, oh my gosh. So there's this guy who suffers from what he calls killer migraines. And so he explored with him about the migraines, and he discovered that he often gets them in the mid-afternoons. And so he explored with him further, and the guy finally confessed that on the occasions he gets mid-afternoon migraines, he's usually spent his lunch having an affair with his secretary. This is one of the guys that he worked with. And I was like, oh my gosh. So it turns out to be a classic example of the first P, it's punishment. So he says that the headache is literally a killjoy, saying, welcome back to the painful consequences of lying, cheating, and not heeding the call to live in your zone of genius. So he's working with this guy, and he said decided to finally say a painful goodbye to his lunchtime trysts and have a considerably more painful series of conversations with his wife. And he found that the migraines stopped. Many physical symptoms, such as headache and back pain, are warning signs that are telling us to slow down, stop what you're doing, and pay attention, because there's something out of integrity here. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like, that's true. Like, you could totally punish yourself for doing something, you shouldn't be doing, or we punish ourselves for success, right? Like, sometimes it's good things and we punish ourselves. So he says he links together the other 2 Ps, prevention and protection, because they almost always occur in the same time. Here's the bottom line on prevention and protection. When you suffer symptoms of illness or you experience an accident, You often do so because you're unconsciously trying to prevent yourself from having to do something that you don't really want to do, or you're trying to protect yourself from something that you don't want to feel. And so he talks about this guy, Dr. Smith, who is like, a very respectable, brilliant colleague of his, shared an office for a while. He's a university professor. And Dr. Smith is supposed to do a presentation. And on the day he showed up for his presentation, he showed up with laryngitis. So he ends up getting out of doing the presentation. But the author decides to ask him if he might be willing to explore his laryngitis as an upper limit symptom. And for a long time, Dr. Smith tells him that he had wanted to break out of his university job and work in the private sector. And an opportunity had just opened up in a neighboring state, and he had gone there for the interview the previous Friday and had decided to take the job. So Saturday night and throughout the weekend, he and his wife celebrated this special occasion, in his career and move and money and all the things. But then Monday loomed and he had to face the sober reality again. He didn't want to tell the university yet because there were still some key details to work out about the new position. So he was happier and more excited than he'd been in a long time, but he didn't want to talk about it yet. So instead, in his presentation, he had to appear enthusiastic about this research that he didn't want to be doing at a university where he no longer wanted to work. And he didn't relish the idea of lying and faking it, but he couldn't figure out how to handle the situation any other way. So prevention and protection came to the rescue. And then while they were talking, Gay Hendricks says halfway through their conversation, the laryngitis disappeared from this guy and his voice returned to normal, but the guy didn't notice it at first. It says the next time you find yourself with a stomach ache, a throbbing head, a stubbed toe, ask yourself if you might be upper limiting. Sometimes a headache is just a headache. But often, if you look a little deeper, you'll find that it's an expression of your upper limit problem. It's telling you that it's time to open up and embrace a new high water mark of positive energy that's trying to establish itself in you. Sometimes the positive message is a message we're afraid to hear, such as something like, it's time to quit my job and do something else. But unconsciously prefer dealing with the pain. It says dozens of clients made this kind of discovery, realizing that they had unconsciously preferred dealing with pain of chronic headaches or back pain rather than the fear and uncertainty of the underlying message. The bad news is that pain can last a long time if we're unwilling to pay attention to the hidden message. The good news is that the fear and uncertainty last only as long as it takes us to hear the underlying positive message and begin to act on it. So that just was really eye-opening for me about the way that our brain is powerful, our subconscious, like the things that it can do and exasperate these physical symptoms in our body because we're fearful of taking the next step or letting someone down or stepping into, where we think we should be doing the things that we are called to do. So on page 97, he talks about the integrity breach. The most popular integrity breaches are lies, broken agreements, and withheld truths. And I found this interesting. He said, many people think of integrity as a moral issue. And of course, in part, it is. If you think of integrity as a physics issue instead of a moral one, you'll see that it belongs alongside unarguable forces such as gravity. Long before morality came into play, and I did not know this, the original definition of integrity had to do with wholeness and completeness. To be in integrity meant that you were whole and complete. To be out of integrity meant a breach in your wholeness had occurred, and there was a gap in your completeness. I was like, learn something new every day. Did not know that. So he says, where are we likely to find integrity breaches? The first place to look is in the subtle ways that we lie to ourselves in order to conceal feelings we do not want to accept consciously. So he suggests asking yourself, would you be willing to consider that your conflict is not about what you think it's about? And he's having a coaching and therapy session with this couple who the wife, I guess, continuously like berating on the husband about having like intimate feelings about these other two girls at work. And she sees like sexual flirtation and things like that. He swears that's not an issue. And she sees it. Right. And it's really bothering her. And she doesn't let it go. And so she says she found herself being critical of herself as well as her husband. And out of nowhere, I would suddenly start making mental lists of all my shortcomings and my husband's. And then I started criticizing him out loud. Then he would start in on me, and then we'd be off and running. So the author says, when you hide feelings inside yourself, you start seeing them in other people. It's called projection. And there are dozens of chapters in the psychology textbooks on how it works. But simply put, if you have some emotion within you that you don't know how to manage, you seal that emotion away and you start trying to manage other people's versions of it. So he asked her to think back to before this started. And then he asked her, did you have some feelings of your own that you hid down inside of you? And he said, it was like an electric feeling in the room. She got really defensive and she was like, you think this is all my fault? And he was like, oh, absolutely not. And so he explains to her and asks her to explore more into this, and finds out that I guess she had like an emotional connection with a guy at a party once. And she felt like she could talk to this guy in a way she couldn't talk to her husband. It wasn't sexual. It was more emotional. And she felt really bad about that. And she wished she had that connection with her husband. And so he summarizes it and says, so you felt attracted to the young man because you were connecting with him on an emotional level. And you really want that connection with Jonah, the husband, but you despair of ever getting it. And if you don't get that, you feel like you're going to fail to accomplish one of your biggest life goals. He was like, that's really big stuff. No wonder you started accusing your husband of being attracted to a couple of the women on your staff. Like, because we tend to project the way we feel into other people. And so he says, here's something I've learned from many experiences of helping people resolve conflicts. Under the surface of most conflicts, you'll find that the wearing parties are actually feeling the same deeper emotions. Two people may be locked in an angry conflict for weeks, but when they get beneath the boiled surface of the issue, they discover that the real issue is that they're both sad about something they've kept hidden. So I was like, that's probably true. So the first step to wholeness is discovering your story. This is on page 107. An integrity breach occurs when we do something that separates us from the wholeness of ourselves or other people. So he asks us to get good at asking questions like these in order to find these breaches and restore wholeness. Where do I feel out of integrity with myself? So out of wholeness, out of completion. What is keeping me from feeling complete and whole? What important things am I not letting into my awareness? Where in my life am I not telling the full truth? Where in my life have I not kept my promises? In my relationship with blank, what do I need to say or do to feel complete and whole? Questions such as these will lift you out of the limiting story that you've been living in. Almost all of us have a story about why we don't access our genius. So let's see. He talks about how your attitude regarding these things, that it's easier to chuckle over things than to fret over them. In one of his advanced groups of executives, some of the participants began referring to the upper limit problem by its acronym ULP, ULP, and they pronounced it like gulp. One of the group's members said he remembered comic book characters saying ULP when they encountered something unexpected. That made me think of like comic books and how it's like bam, wham, whoosh, like that ULP. I was like, oh, okay. So something unexpected, and it didn't take long for ULP to catch on. Soon, people were saying things like, I had an ULP today, and I caught myself in the midst of an ULP this afternoon. He says, I encourage you to adopt this kind of playfulness toward all of your ULPs. An attitude of playful wonder is characteristic of people when they're operating in the zone of genius. So he has some action steps for us, some daily ones that we can begin to take to keep us on track and help us get into the zone of genius. He wants us to make a commitment to keeping an attitude of wonder and play while learning about our upper limit behaviors. And he wants us to say these sentences like this in our mind as often as we like. I commit to discovering my upper limit behaviors and to having a good time while I'm learning about them. Make a list of your upper limit behaviors. Here are some of the most common ones. There's worrying, blame and criticism, getting sick or hurt, squabbling, hiding significant feelings, not keeping agreements, not speaking significant truths to the relevant people. Like if you're mad at John, he's the relevant person to talk to. It doesn't help to tell Fred that you're mad at John. Or deflecting, like brushing off compliments is a good example of deflecting. So anyway, that's pretty much the conclusion of chapter 3. It was super long. The Audible was over an hour. I actually ended up reading it faster to myself when I turned his voice off. We just don't speak in the same speed. So anyway, he just wants us to consciously let us make more room in our awareness for abundance, love, and success. And use these resources for our whole being and not just our mind. For example, feel more love in your chest and your heart, savor the body feeling as well as the mental satisfaction of success and abundance, and embrace a new story that tells about your adventures in your zone of genius. So that concludes chapter 3. If anybody has any comments or questions or thoughts or insights they'd like to share about chapter 3, you can unmute yourself or speak in the chat. And if there's not anything, then I will move on to chapter 4. Chapter 4 was much shorter, thankfully. I'm going to hopefully get through it in our time here, because there's quite a few little stories and scenarios in here that really resonated with me in chapter 4. I felt like it really picked up a bit in chapter 4. If you found chapter 3 to be a bit drony, you were not alone, but I think those understanding and recognizing those ways we upper limit ourselves, I think is really important. But chapter 4 is about building a new home in your zone of genius and how to make every moment an expression of genius. So in this chapter, he helps us to discover the answers to 2 main questions, which is what is my genius? And how can I bring forth my genius in ways that serve others and myself at the same time? So he wants us to break through to unparalleled heights of productivity and life satisfaction. The better we get, the better we want to be. And he says, you and I probably know plenty of brilliant, dedicated, hardworking people who hopped through difficult hoops for things that have done like maybe getting a Harvard MBA. He says, you and I also know that most of them never made the big leap into their zone of genius. If you want to take a close look at this phenomenon, all you need to do is attend a class reunion. I thought that was funny, right? Because we all we have all these big goals and dreams, and then we get to, a later point in our life, and then we're like, oh, I didn't do the things I said I was going to do. So he says, not long ago, he gathered with a number of people who got their PhDs at Stanford. So he's like all these brilliant minds together in a room, they're having drinks, they're all talking. And he noticed there's like a group of professors, and then there's a group of like private practice therapists. Okay. And so the professors in the group, he noticed that a lot of them were claiming or complaining of sluggish bureaucracies and administrations that didn't support their research. They complained of pitiful salaries, of a dire shortage of faculty parking spaces. And the theme was, if it weren't for Blake, I could be doing what I really want to do. But then he also noticed that the private practice therapists had their own set of complaints: slow payments from insurance agencies or insurance companies, and the ever expanding quagmire of paperwork. The therapists made a lot more money than the professors, so the therapists' complaints were flavored more by financial woes. They spoke bitterly of greedy ex-spouses, high alimony payments, long hours, ungrateful clients, exhaustion, burnout. The theme was, if it weren't for Blake, I could really be doing what I really want to do. And it was funny because like the professors envied the private practice people, who in turn were envious of, they were envious of each other. And it was just like, he was noticing all of this. And so their complaints were all symptoms of not taking the big leap. So after he listened to them complain, he would ask, if outside influences like money or insurance companies or bureaucrats were not a problem, what would you really love to be doing? And I think that's an important question that we all ask ourselves. Like, if money was not an object, what would you want? Where would you go? What would you do? If you, where would you travel to, or what job would you be doing? If you weren't stuck in the one you're doing, what would you do instead? If there was no limit to where you could live, where would you live? Or, I think it's important to explore those things in ourselves. It helps you find, really where you should be, what your purpose is. So he says, sorry. He said almost all of them could tell him clearly what they'd love to be doing. And their answers were things like, I'd love to have time to write the book I've been wanting to write. Or I'd love to create videos so more people could get access to the techniques I use. Or I'd love to have more of an impact in the world. And most people have a carefully crafted, well-justified story about why they can't take their big leap. Some people are like, well, I can't possibly take the time to write or make a video because my family needs me. Or another person's about stress. Well, I tried getting up at 5 a.m. for a while to work on my book, but then I couldn't do that and then do a good job with my 6 p.m. and 7 p.m. therapy clients. And for others, it was purely about the money. Well, I can't do what I really want to do because I might not make as much money doing that. And it's a huge fear underneath every complaint. If I took the big leap into my zone of genius, I might fail. What if I really opened up to my true genius and I found that my genius wasn't good enough? Better to keep the genie in the bottle and coast along in the zone of excellence. And I have to admit, a little Christina Aguilera played in my head when I read that sentence. I don't know. We've got So moving on. He says, that way I don't have to risk taking a big leap and finding it isn't good enough. That way I don't have to risk discovering the ugly possibility that I don't have a zone of genius. And I was like, And he actually wrote it in italics, and that's exactly how I felt it too. Because I was like, oh my gosh, like what if I risk that? What if it's possible? What if I actually don't have this gift, this purpose? And that's a scary thought, right? And to that, I would say, open your Bible and remind yourself who you belong to. Anyway, moving on. That's not in the book. That's just my own tip. So, unless you're very lucky or very enlightened, you're likely to hear those nattering voices and feel nagging fears within you. They're part of the deal. And I found this very reassuring right here. Like, I literally have this guy with a PhD who is a licensed therapist, counselor, life coach, all the things. He says, you shouldn't try to talk yourself out of them, out of your fears. Just notice the voices and feel the fears. That's all you need to do with them. I was like, wait, what? I just need to just feel it and let it be. You don't need to rid yourself of them. Where would they go anyway? And I was like, oh, I don't know. Like, where would my fears go? So all you need to do is acknowledge them, wave to them, and let them know that you're aware, and then get busy learning to live in your zone of genius. Just, okay, thanks for that unsolicited advice. I'm going to live my life and parent the way I want now. Thanks. Right? Like, I think, I was like, oh my gosh. So we have our fears and we're just supposed to be like, okay, cool. All right, moving on. Like, just live your life. So he wants us to make a genius commitment. In your zone of genius, work doesn't feel like work. You have plenty of time to do what you want to do. In your zone of genius, time doesn't fly, it flows. I thought that was beautiful. That was like a really beautiful statement. Time flows when you're in your zone of genius. It doesn't just fly by and, don't even remember it happening or whatever. I know, like, just in my own daily life, like just being a, busy homeschooling mom and taking care of a house and a baby and all the things, like, time flies, right? But it's like, slow down a second. And let's find where my genius is, and I agree. Like, when I'm sitting on my couch holding my baby's reading, time doesn't fly, it flows. Like, just breathe. So I was like, oh, okay. So he says he's found that it's essential to begin with a commitment to living in your zone of genius. Your commitment must come before you know how to make good on it. The image that comes to mind is from the third Indiana Jones movie. And I was like, okay, I need to go back and watch this because I don't remember this. But Indy in the movie, he must step out into thin air in a gesture of commitment before a bridge magically appears beneath his feet. I don't remember that. If you do, I don't remember that. I was like, I need to watch that movie. But the power of your commitment brings forth the means necessary for you to live in your zone of genius. You know, it's one of those just step out in faith things, right? Like just take the step and make that vow. It's a powerful, sincere commitment, a vow that you really want to live your life in the zone of genius. And your journey will be blessed with uncommon good fortune at all the twists and turns of the road. Commitment has that power. And I thought that was amazing. So he wants us to say to ourselves, I commit to living in my zone of genius now and forever. I commit to doing it. Nothing's going to stop me. But I was talking with a friend yesterday. I'm kind of one of those chicks. It's like, go ahead, tell me I can't do it. And then I'll show you exactly how I can. So that's just my personality. But the genius questions, because your sincere commitment is an entry gate to the zone of genius. And now that you stepped out into the unknown, the bridge can appear under your feet. The bridge to your zone of genius is a set of questions that you ask yourself. Ask doesn't quite capture the flavor of how I want you to use the questions, he says. He says, I want you to wonder about them. And to wonder about something is to explore with an open mind and an open heart. Wonder is defined as amazed admiration. So be sure to do your wondering with the attitude that your discoveries will be amazing and admirable. So genius question number 1 says, what do I love most to, or what do I most love to do? I love it so much that I can do it for long stretches of time without getting tired or bored. So if we're trying to find our zone of genius, you can make a note. If you're brave and you want to put it in the chat, you can. But if you already know, and if you don't know, then you need to sit and wonder about it. It's just what your genius is connected to what you love most, what I love most to do. That's what your genius is connected to. He wants us to enter the outskirts of our zone of genius by asking myself what I love most to do. Wonder about this until you have a clearly forming sense of it in your body. You don't have to know it clearly and specifically. You just need to feel the glimmer of it in your inner world. So I think that's important to just, not right now, but if you thought of it, but what do I love? What can I do? And it just isn't boring. And genius question number 2. Now let's render what I love most into something much more specific. Here's the second question I'd like you to ponder. What work do I do that doesn't seem like work? I can do it all day long without ever feeling tired or bored. It's when you're at your very happiest. When you're doing it, you think, this is why I do the work I do. This is it. So he talks about this guy, Bob. And I thought this was an interesting story. I actually highlighted a lot of this. So Bob, who had risen through the ranks in a major corporation, a few months after his promotion to CEO, he came to me because, as he put it, I haven't had a decent night's sleep since I took over the job. Something's wrong, and I just can't figure out what it is. So I flew out to Chicago to see if we could find out what was bugging Bob. Genius question number 2 turned the key. When I asked him what aspect of his work didn't feel like work to him, he told me that what he loved best was wandering around, talking to other executives for 10 seconds or 5 minutes about whatever was on their mind. He said he got more done in those casual conversations than in formal meetings. Suddenly the light dawned, and he said, I haven't done that a single time since I got promoted to CEO. The reason was partly logistical. He was now in a suite of offices that was separate from where he usually did his wandering around. And he'd also been so inundated with new data that he had spent most of his time trying to get all that in his head. He made a commitment to start wandering around again, and even did an hour of it while I was there. I flew back home that night and heard the next day that he got a good night's sleep that night. If you're like most of us, you feel sad or irritated about the amount of your precious time that gets eaten up in the necessary trivia of your day. As you get more successful, I thought this was really relevant to us as we grow our businesses and rise up and rank up. As you get more successful, it's common to feel a mounting pressure about this issue, an unnatural hurry up that feels unhealthy to your well-being. And I think this is where alignment comes into play. But he says, I believe that the sense of mounting pressure is the call to live in your zone of genius. I've seen it disappear with miraculous speed when people opened up to wondering what their true genius might be. If you're feeling any kind of that pressure, you've made it to the right book, and I'm very glad that you did. And I thought that was reassuring. So genius question number 3 is, in my work, what produces the highest ratio of abundance and satisfaction to amount of time spent? So even if I only do 10 seconds or a few minutes of it, an idea or a deeper connection may spring forth that leads to huge value. He says, over and over, I hear executives in fits of frustration give voice to complaints like this. If I could just sit in my office and think for an hour without being interrupted, I could produce amazing results. And I know sometimes I've said that as a mom, like if I could just have a minute to myself, like I would be able to think and plan out all of my success, right? So he says, I don't make that complaint anymore, although I used to hear it come from my lips fairly often. But for many years now, I've spent at least an hour every day meditating and letting my mind roam freely. And I personally have done a bit of research lately on meditation and how important it is to just sit and be still and think without and we've heard where it says don't wake up immediately and check your email and start giving yourself to everyone else who's messaged you, in the middle of the night or all morning or whatever. Don't invite those people into your bedroom. Don't immediately turn on the television or immediately start tending to everyone else. It's really important to be able to get up and be better able to lead your people and lead your day when you've had a minute to just think. And that's something I'm trying to cultivate in my own life. And after reading this, I find it to be even more important and solidified my desire to do this. So he says, perhaps it's connecting with your staff or your customers in a certain kind of way, or perhaps it's simply picking up the phone and having a certain kind of conversation with a key person. Whatever it is, I want you to find it, and I want you to put the highest priority on doing some of it every day. He says, for the last couple of decades, I sat down for a half hour of meditation and free mind play. I do this before I engage in any official work, such as email, writing, or project planning. So yeah, I hear that from top leaders and producers and CEOs and authors and medical professionals, and just the importance of not just getting to all the things without gathering your thoughts first. So he says, for some years ago, he worked with a lady named Nancy, and I really like this. So this is where you need to pay attention, because I think a lot of us are going to relate to this. Nancy had a burning desire to write mystery novels. She also had 3 kids, a husband, and a big commitment to activities in her church and her community. Nancy had published one novel that did well enough to make the publisher want more, but not well enough for her to hire household help or a personal assistant. And I read this to Danny. I was like, I feel like I'm right there, babe. I've got this amazing success, this growing team, making some good money that I'm, happy and feel proud of. And it's just enough that I want to keep going, right? I've got the itch, but I'm not where I can hire someone else to handle all the chaos of my day, right? So he says in their first and only session, he asked Nancy to describe how she spent her day. And she told me that after getting her kids and husband off to work, she straightened up the house and took care of infrastructure stuff like paying bills and making grocery lists. Then she said, if I've got any energy left, and I was thinking this chick needs active, I sit down and write for an hour or two. And if not, I take a nap and I try to write for an hour or so before the kids come home. Legit, this chick needs plexus, right? So he summarized Nancy's priorities based on how she spent her day. And he said, so your family's your highest priority, right? And she agreed. Yeah, of course. And he says, and your second priority is housework and infrastructure. And your third priority is writing. No, she exclaimed. Writing is a much higher priority than housework and that sort of thing. And I pointed out that if that were true, she would do her writing before she did house-related things. Her reply was the key to resolving the whole issue. And she said, but I can't sit down and write unless I've got a clean house and things are taken care of. And I personally relate to this. I know I've shared this in past book club sessions. Like if the sink is full of dishes and I'm at the dining room table where I can see it and I'm like, got my IPAs and I'm about ready to conquer the world. And then I see that sink full of dishes. I can't do it. And I've stopped myself from completing my things because I'm like, I have to do the dishes. Or I know there's wet laundry in the washing machine. And if I don't move it over, it's going to stink and I'm going to have to wash it again. Like we all do that, right? Like how many days has it been in here? Let me smell it. Crap, I got to wash it again. Like it's been in here too long. So things like that derail me. And so I really took this story to heart. So he says, sure, you can get down, get to busy writing without doing those things. You just have to I said, you just think you have to get the other stuff done first. Where did you get an idea like that? And she said, but what if my husband comes home from work and he finds a dirty house and I'm just sitting up there writing? And he says, well, he'd find a wife who put a higher priority on her creative expression than she did on keeping the house clean. Do you think he'd be upset about that? Well, not really. She said, I think he'd actually like it. And then I was thinking, Danny appreciates a clean house. I'm not going to lie. He's a very tidy, neat person. But I think he would really appreciate me going emerald more than the house clean. I'm just saying. Like, that's just our personal thing. And I even actually broached the subject with him and he was like, yeah, I agree. And I was like, yeah, so maybe I should just start doing my IPAs first, stop making excuses about the housework, do my IPAs. Because when we do them consistently, right, fruit happens, right? When you tend the garden, fruit will come. And I was like, and then I'll just rank up and make more money and then I can just hire a housekeeper and then our problem just will be short-lived. And he was like, I like that idea. So anyway, he says, as our conversation developed, it became clear that she was holding herself hostage to housework for upper limit reasons. Nancy's unconscious mind had constructed a doomed scenario of what would occur if she went all the way into her zone of genius. In her imagination, if she put her full attention into writing, she would neglect her family and they would languish in the absence of her attention. Nancy began to see the absurdity of the way that way of thinking. She also discovered the real fear that was underneath it all, that if she'd made a big commitment to her creativity, she might fail on a bigger scale. If she stayed small, she would avoid the possibility of big rejection. And then we uncovered another important chunk of territory in the session. Nancy also realized that she had a major fear of outshining her siblings. And we talked about this in the last chapters. One of 4 girls, she had received mixed reactions from her sisters when her first novel came out. One sister had been thrilled and very supportive, and the other 2 showed various signs of jealousy and competitiveness. Her unconscious mind's solution had been to put the brakes on her creativity and let herself get consumed by housework and other pressures of daily life in hopes that the strains in the relationships with her sisters would disappear. He said, I suggested another possibility to Nancy. Don't hold yourself back to keep your sisters from feeling jealous. Go all the way and inspire them with your full expression. You can't manage their feelings. Their feelings are their business. And I think that's important with everything. You are not in control of the way someone feels. Their feelings are their own. And we all have to take responsibility for how we feel. No one can make us feel a certain way. A counselor told me that once, so I know it to be true. So, they would probably be just as jealous if you bought a new refrigerator. So you might as well go all the way and write some bestsellers. That way they'll be jealous about something worth being jealous about. They might just go in a positive direction though, and get inspired to do something magnificent in their own lives. So he gave her homework to assign for 1 week, sit down and write before any household related tasks. And just to get his husband and kids out the door, and then force herself to go up and write for an hour or two and just break the pattern. And he says her mind may try to get her back in the old pattern. It may say, no, wash the dishes, put the clothes in the dryer. If you don't, civilization will collapse. But just politely thank your mind for the unsolicited advice and sit down and write anyway, and just better prioritize your day. So she did that. She was better able to move into her creative activities and put them on her priority list where they belonged in her life. So I thought that was interesting. I was like, I'm just going to be like, nope, I got to do my IPAs. The dishes can wait. So Genius question number 4. And I'm going to try and let's see how much is left of this. Oh, okay. I'm going to talk fast. All right. Genius question number 4 says, take a deep breath and expand to embrace a new conception of yourself. The 4th genius question invites you to think of who you are in most unusual terms. It asks you to identify a unique and priceless gift that you carry within yourself. Your exploration into this aspect of yourself is not about self-flattery or an expansion of your ego. And I think that's important for us to know. When we are trying to find what our zone of genius is, it does not mean that we are being egotistical or that we're trying to puff ourselves up or anything like that. We are simply trying to embrace the things God has given us and live our purpose that he wants for us. Okay. Shift your mind out of that. This is not about your ego. It's a clear-eyed look at a deep innermost quality with the intention of applying that quality to make your own life and the lives of others around you more valuable. Okay. So he asks us to ask ourselves, what is my unique ability? This is a special skill that you're gifted with. This unique ability, fully realized and put to work, can provide enormous benefits to you, your organization, your family, anything where you serve. If you look into the essence of who you really are at the deepest level, you'll find a unique gift that you've been blessed with. That gift is your greatest contribution to the people around you. It's the pinnacle skill of your working life, and you can also use it to great benefit in your networking life. And I found this to be really interesting because I know I have thought otherwise. He says this ability that you're looking for is not unique to the whole world. Okay, there's going to be other people with these same skills and qualities. Okay, there may be millions of people who have it. However, it's usually unique in your particular circle or work setting. Okay, and I think that has like kind of thrown me off personally, trying to figure out my gifts and talents, because I'm thinking, what makes me unique? Well, there's other people who have the same gifts and talents and skills that I have. Well, he's like, well, of course, we're talking billions of people in the world, right? But this is unique to your particular circle or work setting. And so he asks, he starts referencing, those little Russian dolls, they stack inside of each other. I love those. I think they're so cute. When you open the big doll, there's a smaller one inside, and then hidden within that doll, there's an even smaller one. Using that image, he wants of us to think of our unique ability as a skill within a skill, within a skill, within a skill. And so he says, here's what I mean. Your unique ability is usually camouflaged inside of a larger skill that you possess. You may not even realize that your unique ability is what is driving your success in applying the larger skill. Like it's connected, usually connected somehow. So, and I thought this was a cute little story. When he was a kid, he says he knew he had a skill in helping people solve problems. He actually didn't get any formal training and therapy skills until he was 24. But according to a family story, he had an early leaning in that direction. So he set up a cardboard box office in his grandmother's living room when he was a preschooler. And he told his family that his job was to help people solve problems. And I could just imagine like a little kid, right, setting up a little office and he's going to help people with their problems. I was like, oh, how cute. So, but according to the story, his family tells him he was very clear and adamant that he didn't handle medical problems. They could take those to an ordinary doctor. He was a different person, a different type of person that specialized in problems around the house. And he said, since I grew up in a small Southern town with no psychiatrists, psychologists, etc., I have no clue where I picked up this idea. Like, it's just, you just imagine like a little kid, right? He also says, I should also mention that this first foray of mine into the consulting business was an utter flop. None of my family members ever took advantage of my services. He says, I can forgive them, though, for being reluctant to consult with a therapist who wore short pants and commuted to work on a tricycle. I thought that was really cute. But it kind of made me thinking like, I don't know, you have people ask sometimes like, when you were a little kid, what did you want to grow up and be? Or what did you think you would do when you were a kid? When you were a child, you knew you were going to grow up and do blah, blah, blah. And I think some people do those things. A lot of people don't, but it kind of makes me wonder and kind of think, I need to think back to the way I would have answered that as a child and see if that unlocks my zone of genius somewhere. So I just thought that little story was cute. But he says the best way I can describe it is that I can be with people in a certain way that enables them to come up with creative solutions that they hadn't thought of before. It's a feeling of respect for the creative process, coupled with a non-judgmental listening for something new to emerge. I thought that was really interesting. So he says it wasn't long. Let's see, I'm just kind of skipping through. I'm on page 136 now, if you're following in your book. He talks about how he was writing like upstairs in his office or something of that nature. And his wife had two of his granddaughters down in the pool with a friend. And they're like 10, 12, 13 years old or so. And he heard them like giggling outside. So he decided to take his work outside. He was like, oh, they're having fun. I'm gonna go out there and kind of work on whatever I'm doing and watch the girls swim with my wife. So he says it wasn't long before the girls swam over to the pool's edge and asked him what he was working on. I told them I was writing a book about the upper limit problem. So the granddaughters nodded because the upper limit problem has been a part of their vocabulary much of their lives. But the granddaughter's friend, Hannah, she was like, well, what's that? And he said, it gave me an opportunity to hear how a 12-year-old would explain it to another 12-year-old. Without missing a beat, his granddaughter, Elsie, says, if you don't know it's okay to feel good and have a good time, you'll do something to mess up when things are going well. I love it when kids can just like lay it out there super simple, like out of the mouths of babes, right? Like they get it and they put it really simply. So he says, I was typing furiously, trying to capture every word. And Hannah, the friend, asked for an example. And so his other granddaughter, Elsie, thought for a moment. And he's trying to type her answers. And finally she said, you remember when we were playing dodgeball during recess last week? And that kid Frankie broke in and kicked the ball over the fence? And Hannah nods and she goes, yeah, he does that sort of stuff all the time. So his granddaughter says, well, he's got an upper limit problem. He doesn't know how to just have a good time all the time. It's like, that's so funny. It makes me think of like the kid who like knocks over the blocks when the other kid does the tower. And I'm like, that kid has an upper limit problem. So anyway, he says he put his grandfatherly pride aside because he thinks that's a pretty good definition of the upper limit problem. Sensing they were on a roll, he said, I told them I was working on a section about unique abilities. And he asked them, what do you think your unique ability is? And he explained that a unique ability is a special gift, something you're really good at that was also helpful to people around you. He said, I was searching for another way to explain it. And then his granddaughter chimed in and said, it's like a superpower, right? And she referenced a movie in which the four heroes each had a superpower they used to help defeating the forces of evil. His other granddaughter got it right away and said, yeah, like a superpower, only it's a real thing. He said, I couldn't have thought of a better way to describe it myself. So I asked the girls, well, what's your real superpower? And so his granddaughter says that hers is, I can sense other people's feelings. He said, I readily agreed. Pretty much from her first breath, I've always found her to be one of the most sensitive, aware people I've ever known. Perhaps influenced by what Elsie said, the other two girls claimed similar superpowers. One says her unique ability was knowing when people were angry, but trying to hide it. And Hannah said her skill was being able to tell if people liked each other. Recalling the dramas of life in junior high school, I told them that I thought all of those skills would come in very handy one day. So I just thought that was a nice little way of like kind of summarizing like what the upper limit problem is and how to find your zone of genius. It's, it really is. It's just somebody, you just knock the tower over. That person has a problem. They can't just have a good time and enjoy it. And your unique ability, your zone of genius is your superpower. So he wants us to articulate our unique ability. And so he talks about this girl that he worked with. This is the larger skill that's hidden within your innate gift. And he worked with Anne, and Anne is a 40-year-old CEO of a Silicon Valley consulting firm. And when he asked her about her unique ability, she answered running meetings. And he said that was the outermost of the Russian dolls. So I wanted to go a level in and said, well, when you're running meetings, what is it that you're doing when you're at your very best? And she thought for a moment and said, well, one thing is knowing when and how to gracefully cut off a discussion and move along. And that gave us a little more detail, but it still wasn't the essence of the skill. So I said, well, what gives you the ability to know when to do that? She paused and reflected and said, I've never thought about this before, but I feel an energy shift in the room and inside of me. Something shifts in the room and I just know it's time to move on. Her face began to take on a glow as we discussed this subtler skill. That's one way I can tell people are honing in on their unique ability. Their faces reflect a sense of wonder and rapt attention. Now that I think about it, she said, I've been able to do that since I was a kid. So it was a way to stay out of my parents' way when they were getting into one of their fights. She told me that she had grown up in a fairly chaotic family with a father who drank too much and a mother who resented having to carry the extra weight of responsibility. The first place most of us use our unique ability is in navigating the tricky shoals of childhood. If you reflect on your unique ability, you'll probably find that it made its appearance early in your life. You used it, probably without being aware of it, to cope with stressful situations and optimize your ability to thrive. My early life was an ideal training ground for a budding therapist and an executive coach. My mother struggled with depression after my father's sudden death, and I spent much of my early childhood living with my grandparents. They were wonderful with me, but their relationship with each other was a different story. By the time I arrived on the scene, they'd been in a pitched battle for several decades, characterized by constant bickering and periods of uneasy truce. I became a go-between for them in times when communication would stall out completely. Since I was about the only thing they could ever agree on, I was in a unique position to help them paper over the rifts between them and get them talking again. Anne had refined her unique ability in the heat of similar action. I summarized what I'd heard her say. So you have an ability to feel a certain kind of energy shift in the room and inside of you, and tuning into this energy helps you know what to do. That's basically it, she said. I asked her if that ability showed up in other situations. I don't know, she said. That's a good question, because if I can use that wherever I am, I'll always know I'm applying the very best part of me to the job. He says, that's the payoff I'd like for you to get. To do that, I recommend that you deconstruct the set of Russian dolls until you uncover the one that contains your unique ability. This made me think of Shrek and like peeling the layers. If you've seen Shrek, that made me think of that. Begin with a fundamental statement like this. And this is the very, very end of this chapter. So I know we've gone a little bit over, but so he wants you to fill in this sentence. I'm at my best when I'm blank. I'm at my best when blah, 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 X, Y, or Z. Let that statement resonate in your mind a few times and then speak it out loud. Discover what you come up with. Perhaps you come up with, I'm at my best when I'm generating ideas on a yellow legal pad, or I'm at my best when I'm figuring out how to put a team together. Just get a good general statement of what you're doing when you feel you're at your best. Once you've come up with a simple, clear statement of you at your best, go a little deeper. Open up your Russian doll, peel back your layer, Shrek. Use a statement like the following to zoom in for a closer look. When I'm at my best, the exact thing I'm doing is. When I'm at my best, the exact thing I'm doing is. Go for a more detailed description. Like when I'm generating ideas on a yellow legal pad, the exact thing I'm doing is doodling and enjoying the feeling of creating something out of nothing. Go even deeper with a sentence like this. When I'm doing that, the thing I love most about it is, for example, when I'm doodling and creating something out of nothing, the thing I love most is not knowing where it's going to take me. I love the surprise factor, the excitement of seeing what's about to emerge. You'll be able to know you're getting closer to your unique ability when you feel an inner glow of wonder and excitement. Even though I've been with hundreds of people as they tapped into that feeling, I never feel blasé about it. There's something intrinsically enlivening about people or about being with people when they're discovering this depth within themselves. Probably because the process is connected to my own genius, I can engage in it all day long and never get tired. And he says, that's what I want for you. So I would encourage you to go back and listen to this Zoom or listen to the audio again, reference your notes that you in your book, the things you highlighted. Take the time to answer these questions between now and next week. God, this was a super long chapter. I wish I had taken the time to answer them so I could give some more of my insights. I'm pretty much an open book kind of chick. So it's not that I wouldn't tell you my answers. I just didn't have time to do them this time. So if you feel bold and brave and you want to share those, you're more than welcome to do that next time. But I think this is how we're going to figure out our inner, it's almost like talking to your inner child, peeling back the onion layers, opening up the little Russian dolls, so that we can move into chapter 5. We're going to chapter, actually this coming, let me check the date. I believe, yes. So this Saturday is actually the live Zoom with Gay Hendricks, the author. So I will make sure the link to register for that is in our team chat and like on our team page and things like that, because you want to register. Normally, ideally, we would like to finish the book and then listen to the author and their perspective of the book. And they always tell things that weren't in the book or other stories. It's really, really cool. But because of convention, we actually missed a week of reading. We got started a little bit late. So what we're doing now is we're reading really about half of the book, and then we're going to get to listen to Gay Hendricks this Saturday. And then we're going to come back together next week, same time, and talk about chapters 5 and 6. So you have a little bit longer time to read the next 2 chapters and go back and answer these questions for yourself. So you have some homework to do. But we really do want to live in our zone of genius and discover our hidden potential and be able to embrace the gifts that God has given us. So I want you to take the time to answer those questions. Plan to get on Saturday to the Zoom for the live author chat with Gay Hendricks. Plexus corporate hosts that, so it will not be on my Zoom. It will be on the Plexus corporate Zoom number. But when you register, it gives you the number and it'll send you the email where you can click it. So be sure and do that so we can hear more sort of behind the scenes insights from Gay Hendricks. I think that's going to be really entertaining. And then we'll come back together next week to discuss chapters 5 and 6, which is living in your zone of genius, using the ultimate success mantra to live in love, abundance, and creativity. That's chapter 5. So that sounds interesting. And then chapter 6 is, let's see what that one's going to be. That one says, living in Einstein time, creating time for the full expression of your genius. I know I need that one, right? I think we all do. We always say we don't have enough time for the things, but whenever we get into these books, they tell us we really do. We just need to better prioritize our list, right? So, all right. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for chapters 3 and 4 of The Big Leap. And I'll see you Saturday on the corporate Zoom and then next Wednesday here on my Zoom to discuss chapters 5 and 6. All right. Love y'all. Bye.